Well, thank you, David, for a generous introduction. So, he promised you a nuts and bolts presentation. So nuts and bolts it is, after the context that was set by Gansan. Yes. First, let me say that it's a pleasure to be back at ICRISAT. Indeed, I came here before when I was at INI, and we were partners and set up an office here. And, frankly, we've come a lot to India. Gansan explained some of the challenges that India has. There's also a lot of achievement, of course, particularly in science that we can build on. Well, I look forward to seeing many more of the new science right here at ICRISAT in the next couple of days. I had my first hour with the ICRISAT management team this morning. I've learned a little bit. Normally, I give the sort of new CGIAR presentation when I come to centers, and I'll do a little bit of that in an all-staff meeting day to day. But right now, let's talk a bit about the CGIAR's strategic results framework and the portfolio of programs that have been put in place. Of course, we're extremely happy that through these two CRPs that are launched today, we may now have the full portfolio approved, with a little footnote that the Drylands system CRP has been only conditionally approved, but we are pretty optimistic that that will be added to the portfolio soon as well. So we finally have the full portfolio, and we can move away from the time of writing proposals to actually putting them into practice, which I think is a great opportunity. So just to remind you, Gansan already said it, it's good to remember why we're here, if you like, and how we are in such a different time. After Gansan said some time, after the decades of relative neglect of agriculture and the investment going down, food security is suddenly back at the top of the agenda. No doubt, if you like, because of the price spikes in 2007, 2008. We have a new vigor, I think, in the sector, a new realization that food security is, in a very nuanced way, still humanity's greatest challenge. Not just increasing, if you like, the total productivity of cereals, but now in a way where we're thinking about food security and quality and nutrition and sustainability in an integrated way. Producing more food still, but without destroying the environment. From land already in use by small-scale farmers, mostly women. We know all this in this room. It is very good to know that thanks to, if you like, these very fortunate events, these things are very much top of mind for lots of people. Now, part of the reaction could be to these food price spikes, things like this. What people worry about is land grabs in Africa, very large-scale investments in oil palm plantations, for instance in Uganda, displacing thousands of farmers. We're pretty sure that, if you like, that is not the answer. But are we in the CGIAR able to come up with another answer? I mean, our overall agenda now is around sustainable intensification. We've been able to do that once, a while ago, here in Asia. It's given us a very big reputation. But can we do it, if you like, again? I mean, Gansan already referred to it. The world for a long time thought we would have these steady increases in productivity, and particularly Ken Kasman of our Science Council now said, look, that's actually not quite happening. We're seeing that these increases in yield are stagnating. In addition to climate change and others, if we, in business as usual, project these trends, they may well go down. So, in many ways, it is sort of the elevator pitch of the challenge, right? Can we deliver sustainable intensification in the face of this challenge, in the face of the fact that we are beginning to see stagnating yields out there in the field? Now, there are some, of course, in a way, whether you think of it as positive or negative depends on your perspective. And there's still an enormous yield gap between what IRI shows for rice on their on the station. I was recently at IRI, and you see these fields there, which now for many years have been producing 3 crops at 7 tons per hectare, and then just a mile outside IRI's fences, Filipino farmers, under quite similar agroecological conditions, might get 2 crops of 4 tons. A very big gap. But of course, then you move to Africa, where you don't necessarily have the same favorable conditions, you don't have access to the same seeds, and people de facto are getting something more like a crop of 2 tons per hectare. Now, that's both showing that we haven't been able to, if you like, move the technologies that we have out. It also shows that there is, if you like, glass is half full, glass is half empty, opportunity to move the boundary enormously. If we're able to make a difference here, or if we're able to make a difference in things like water productivity. On the one hand, I come from water, and for decades people have been talking about water scarcity as if we were running out of water to produce enough food. But in fact, we know, of course, that water productivity out in the field is still very low, whereas, say, image research shows that you can get 1 or 2 kilos per cubic meter of water in cereals. In practice, what people are getting is more, 0.10 to 0.5 kilos in key basins, results from the challenge program of water and food. So yes, that shows both the challenge, but also the opportunity that we have. Can we make a difference there? And indeed, what is the science potential then? Well, what is the potential to make a difference, to move that boundary, to meet those challenges? When I go from center to center, I haven't seen ICRISAT's labs yet, but it's pretty amazing that from CIAT, one of the first centers that I was, to IRI, the excitement about the basic science. 5 years ago, when I would travel around, people would talk about the potential of molecular breeding or using markers. Just 5 years later now, that has become everyday practice. Everybody works on that. We're moving so rapidly in the life sciences, we're just scratching the surface of what we can do in that space. That is one part of it. And then, of course, IT. We've been talking about that for years as well. We all know that farmers now have mobile phones in their pockets. And there is an opportunity to bring, if you like, precision agriculture even to small farmers. There's, I think, a whole series of issues that we could do that where we're also just scratching the surface. And the third area, I'm not sure that we know exactly what to do in all our farming systems programs. We definitely recognize that that is a challenge we have also to pick up as part of our overall agenda. Move to more landscape approach. Maybe we call these things more river-based management approach as well. Deal with the landscape, deal with farming systems, think about policy, think about whether you call it inclusive market access, or I'm not here at ICRISAT or value chains. We have to think about how farmers become part of, if you like, well, I'm struggling whether I should use animal or value chains here, either or, to think about not just higher productivity in crops, but how those get to farmers and how farmers have access to markets, for sure. We think there's a massive potential here. The question is more, is the CGIAR up to this challenge? Right? Can we deliver on this challenge that, if you like, definitely is there in the science? I like to show this graph that Bob Ziegler showed before. We all know about Moore's Law, where, if you like, IT was the most exciting sector for a number of years, because every couple of years the price of chips came down, which was driving IT innovation in all areas. Here in Hyderabad, all young people wanted to go work in IT. People don't necessarily realize that in the life sciences, if you like, the price of sequencing drops even more rapidly than Moore's Law would predict. And how I would like to see that is that, if you like, the rate of innovation in our basic sciences in agriculture is even more rapid than in IT. That creates an excitement where, I don't know whether we can predict that in 10 years from now, more young graduates will want to work in agriculture than in IT here in Hyderabad. But certainly we see a lot of young scientists that are willing to work in agriculture again. So after having missed out more or less on a generation where people didn't want to work in agriculture, places like Wageningen, where I come from, the Netherlands, student numbers falling like that, and now going back up quite rapidly. It all translates into a new excitement in the area where we work. That the CGIAR, as Vanessa has already said, has tried to capture into a single strategy and results framework. Now, if you've read this document, very big document, you could say that it is a strategy. It outlines the key areas that we want to work in, but it's relatively short on results. So it's been approved, but we are aware that when it was approved by our funders forum, we need to add much more of a forward-looking foresight dimension to it. And we'd love to have a better process for setting priorities. And we really want to measure the progress. Able to measure performance. So yes, we have an overall program. We also have some homework to do, and we're working on that in workshops like we have here this week. In fact, we're working with the Science Council to pick up these challenges. I won't go through all this in detail, but if you haven't read it, this is an interesting paper. The Science Council has come up with a white paper on priority setting that laid out how we can do this, how we can identify more clear intermediate development objectives, how we can help use those to set a system of priorities within the CGIAR, how we can then hopefully be much clearer on where we ought to invest and how we can come up with value for money. And the CGIAR has picked that up into what we call the Strategy and Results Framework Action Plan, another short document that sort of lays out what our agenda is in 2013 to put this into practice, to come up with much clearer development outcomes at the system level as well as at the CRP level. Now, if you're an outside partner that hasn't heard all this, you may be interested because this is what the CRPs, like we're starting here this week, will be engaged in, at least at the leadership and management level, quite a bit. So we will start these processes like the CRPs that we're launching here this week, but we won't rewrite the proposals, but we'll keep sharpening the focus that we have and how we can deliver on our development outcomes. We have a big portfolio, so we are implementing the strategy and result framework through 15 CRPs plus a program on gene banks that spans the range from indeed our, more heartland agenda on improved germplasm, all the way to policies and markets and nutrition and health. And I have quite a few slides that show you a glimpse of that. I'll just show you those more as a teaser than that we have a chance to really go into detail here. But I'd like to also make it clear that these are all maybe developed one by one, but we're also trying to, align them and integrate them now as a portfolio. And while all of these are global programs, they of course are also working on the ground. And we are trying to bring these programs together in specific places where each of the programs has sentinel landscapes as for forest or hubs as for other programs or key sites. We're beginning to see how we have opportunities to work not just in each of the programs, but across them. For instance, in Bangladesh, there seems to be a laboratory where 6-7 CRPs can work on the ground across CRP boundaries as well. Ethiopia is another place where quite a few of the CRPs see each other, and we're beginning to see an opportunity to cut across the portfolio and not only look at each of them one by one. So we're going through them. We're not using the numbers as much anymore because that's for people from the outside. Talking about CRP 1.1 is very insightful. So we're trying to use the names, but sometimes we'll slip up a little bit and still use our numbers. But the first CRP, therefore, focuses on dryland systems. That's the one that is provisionally approved, the one that Mahmoud Ricarda knows a lot more about, if you like. We are confident that that will be the last, if you like, CRP joining the rest soon, focusing on the dryland areas. One of the three systems CRPs, drylands, human tropics, and aquatic systems. Our effort to say we are not just about improved germplasm, we have to think what this means for farmers in a more integrated livelihood perspective. we know that there are a few farmers that only, well, when you speak to our colleagues at IRI, they say, hey, we're working not just on rice, we're working on rice-based systems. But many farmers don't just do one crop, of course, they have a variety of activities. And for us to understand how we can work with farmers and their partners, from the seed companies that work with them to the governments that have enabling policies so that farmers can have access to markets, to look at these systems as a whole, we think is a key challenge. We probably don't have as much strength yet in the CGIAR on the farming systems research. We worked on that in the 70s and 80s, stopped that, and we're coming back to that in a way, thinking that we really have to do a much better job in those areas than today. A key challenge. But it's definitely, we had a workshop at World Fish last week where the three systems, CRPs, were talking to each other and saying, so what is the way, our innovation platforms, for instance, a key way through which we can deliver that. It's pretty interesting that we, I think, are working this way across centers and across CRPs in a much more focused way. The three system CRPs and the policy CRP that supports that and works very closely with that as well. So the policy CRP, for instance, works on issues that cut right across the systems, but also the other CRPs in a way that, for instance, is steering the dialogue at the G20 level, where countries are putting food security very high on the agenda. We have a range of germplasm improvement CRPs, of course maize and wheat, led by CIMIT, but with a lot of partners. Particularly the wheat CRP feels that their new priorities are in Africa. They had key meetings with African nations, with the African Union, to put wheat much higher on the agenda there, and they are proud of their partnerships in a global wheat yield consortium. Wheat is also a program, of course, that is not, cassava doesn't have exactly the same global implications as wheat. Wheat is also a key crop in Europe, so they're in wheat able to have a global wheat yield consortium that, if you like, has partnerships with key institutions outside the CGIAR, from the BBSRC in the UK to CIRAS in France and in the USDA. Opportunities for the CGIAR to work in global partnerships. Now, obviously I can't go in detail in this presentation to all of our CRPs, because a half hour is far from enough for that. But in each of those, we're finding things that are cross-cutting themes as well. Gender, for instance, isn't a separate CRP now, but you'd be amazed at how many people, as I see traveling across the centers, work on gender these days. I think we are being quite successful in integrating a number of these cross-cutting issues into the work of the CRPs. Well, I don't have to speak about the dry-land cereals in this audience. You could be telling me more. I think I'll hear more about that, both the dry-land cereals and, of course, well, the two CRPs launched here. I'm actually skipping those to do it. Livestock and fish is one of the programs that I visited recently in Nairobi. One of the areas where they feel the CGIAR traditionally hasn't spent as much of its energy, if you like, but where we are, through this CRP, now coming up with opportunities to, I think, position that well in the overall CRP portfolio. I'm frankly thinking that I was rather too ambitious in putting all our slides in. I'd like to focus on a few things more at the end. Overall, I think the CRP portfolio is a major opportunity for the CGIAR to move from 3,000 bilateral projects, a very large number of small projects, to a much more focused and strategic portfolio. promising, as we said before, but quite a bit more homework at the same time. All of us are working on these development outcomes that will link what we think the investors will want to invest in at the system level to what we can contribute at the CRP level. This year, we'll make quite a bit of progress, we expect, with both of those processes. After this meeting here, a lot of our CRP leaders will see each other again in Cali together with the ISBC to talk about that process where we're saying, okay, so how can we define our development outcomes coherently in a way that cuts right across the CRPs? Frankly, I was a bit too tied up in my slides when I made these. The comments I'd like to make here at the end is that I believe that the new CGIAR, as Vanessa was saying, is more than well on its way to progress, Vanessa. When I think in a few years from now, we look back on 2012, we'll feel that in 2012 we saw a year when the new CGIAR got legs, if you like, was established. Now we can look forward to a way fine-tune and make sure that we deliver in a way that makes sense, where we show that we have a portfolio that is a set of investments that are high value, that our partners want to work with, that our donors want to invest in. The first results are certainly very encouraging. When you travel around and speak to a lot of scientists like here in the room that say, look, I worked at CIAT, for instance, or at IITA for 10, 11 years. I've worked in cassava. I've worked more with scientists in the other center in the last year than in the 10 years before that. Those are still very early signs, but we are really doing business differently. Not quite yet in a way that we can show different impact in the field, but I'm confident that that is where we are moving. Certainly, we are getting the confidence from investors initially. I mean, people are putting a lot more money into the CGIAR because of the new priority of food security, for sure, but also because I think our partners have confidence in the CGIAR, in the new CGIAR. We'll have a window of opportunity for just a few years, I think, to show that indeed these investments will pay off, to make sure that this is not going to be a little blip, but that we are on a, if you like, a pathway towards, not just the $1 billion where we are at now, but towards that $1.6 billion that, if we predicted 2 years ago, we would need to really deliver on the challenge of a food secure future. In my mind, I can see traveling around the centers that the new CGIAR is indeed ready to take on that challenge. And I look forward to hearing more about KSIConnect and how these two CRPs intend to do that